Not much about the world of construction, but it seems rare. The attention to detail, the artisan nature of it. And so it's not only that this is you all owning your own work and owning your own business, but bringing forward and keeping alive a tradition of building that is powerful and raw and rare. So when I first learned about what you all did, I was like, please come build at our farm, because I want our farm to have that kind of love, in the buildings. And it's been 9 years of trying to figure out how to make this part of everything work, and so to be in this moment where hopefully they're able to share out, not just with the people who are here, but on recording, so people who missed it tonight can still hear the story. I'm just so profoundly thankful and grateful for you all, for you being here, for the work you do, and how you do it. Welcome, Rich.
Hey.
Yeah, sure. Well, really quick, can we just go around and get everyone's names really quick, if you don't mind? I'm Dominic. Yeah.
Latifah. I'm Kiara, she, her.
Emmanuel.
Brianna.
I'm Andrea, this is Stokely.
I'm Adriana.
Yeah. Sorry. Did y'all hear his name? Sorry, Blake.
Hey, Blaine.
Yeah, we're super excited to be here. Thank you for the gracious words. You and I had spoken at a Just Transition Finance training, I think in 2019 or 2020, and about potentially making this happen, and so it's been in the works since then. So it's really exciting to be sitting here. And I've been homies and comrades with folks from Cooperation Roots for a while now, so it's to be in the offices and everything just feels really special. We're Earthbound Building. We I'll let you talk a little bit about the history too, but we really grew kind of out of movement spaces and organizing spaces similar to this. There's an organization called the Black Dirt Farm Collective, which Blaine actually started and founded with his former partner, organizing with farmers all up and down the Mid-Atlantic, so our side of the world, of the country, East Coast. And through some of that work, the need, internally for folks who had the skills to be able to build things for events and large gatherings and things like that became really apparent. And then also amongst the farmers that were being organized with, there was on farms always a need, as you all know now, for infrastructure to be built, to be repaired, to be amended, to be moved. So Earthbound really came and grew sort of out of that need and out of that space. We kind of got our start small, working with farmers, building greenhouses and things. So it's funny you talk about the artisanal work that we do now. It's been a long journey to sort of get to where we're at, and a powerful journey and an important journey. It really kind of came out of sort of the farmer organizing movement space. So it does feel very full circle to be here, helping Cooperation Richmond and build this beautiful, and Urban Tilth build this beautiful farm, because it's kind of bringing us back to the start of where we came from. But now we're doing the work that we envisioned and dreamed about back then. We're actually manifesting that. So it feels really, really powerful. I don't know if you want to add a little bit of history before we kind of keep going.
Where do I want to start? As y'all know, a cooperative process, or to work collectively, to want to do it is a success. To first have that desire to do it, but then the real challenge of taking the desire and how do you make that real in the context of our capitalist economy, in a way that's meaningful and dignified. And so that's sort of been at the crux of Earthbound Building as a space, if you will. There's what Dom just spoke to are sort of our outward facing, the things we want to do in the world, how we show up. And the flip side to co-ops is also what's the internal dynamics that help us grow as people, in a specific way. In our case, it's around a skill set, but also how we relate to each other and show up for each other, more broadly. And so Earthbound has had many iterations over the years. We started in 2014 And to Dom's point, we were building exclusively on farms for farmers, hoop houses or high tunnels greenhouses, and some carpentry. And at that time, we were much larger. We fluctuated from 5 to 7. And the makeup of our group at that time was different than where we are now. We're very relationally based, so for better or for worse, we've never really formally done a formal hiring process. Everyone that has worked with Earthbound or inside of Earthbound, it's all come through relationships from within our community. And that's very important to us because the community that we're part of oftentimes is excluded from the construction industry, and in particular from living wages. And so we were very much focused on creating a space that folks of color, queer folks, women, femme folk could have access to a space that could both honor their skills and their interests for working with their hearts, heads, and minds, and hands, and also receive a living wage. And so that's sort of the internal value set, if you will, of Earthbound. And I would be curious to know, like, if we could have it like discussional, just, you know, conversational, if you will. What are, I guess, you know, we're in Co-op Richmond here. We're working at Urban Tilth, but you know, what are on y'all's minds for?
Before you do that, though, can you frame a little bit more? Because I feel like I don't even really know you all's total story. Like, what do you build now? Who are you now? What do you build now on the regular? What do you like to build? What do you hope to build? In what kind of formation? What is a co-op? Because I think not everybody here might even know what that is.
I can speak to what we build. I call him the co-op guru. He can talk about the co-op. I mean, I can talk about it too, but he's very good at it. So we started out with greenhouses, and
by greenhouses, do you mean little greenhouses?
all sizes, 30, 40 foot by 140 foot down to 12 by 24 foot. So very small. We built greenhouses the size of what's about to be built in this phase 2 development and down to the size of what you have now that you're accessing on the site. And what made us pivot from that was Hurricane Maria that hit the Caribbean in 2017. It hit in October 2017. I have family, you know, augmented family down there, and we reached out to them as soon as the hurricane hit, saying like, hey, how can we be of support? And they said, hey, if you can pull together a group of builders and farmers, come down for a month essentially and help us rebuild our farms. And that's what pivoted Earthbound Building. That experience was transformative on so many different levels, but there we really saw that we can be more than just building greenhouses, that we can step further into our values, build more different types of infrastructure, but also propel a vision out into the world. And so that's run us on this winding road to where we made a hard pivot from greenhouses and started doing a lot more carpentry, learned about natural building and timber framing, started taking on those projects, did terrible at them, didn't make any money, but had a good time doing it. And slowly, get better at it, meet people, learn new things, and to where we are now is that we specialize in timber framing, custom carpentry, and natural building. And so we do a lot of design build, from the design with the client to the actual construction is sort of the space that we sit in now in our neck of the woods.
Yeah, and then on the co-op piece, we working together. There's always, and just being in community. There's always been this really important value placed on being able to own our labor. It's very physical and demanding work that we do. And all of us do, regardless of what you're working in, whether it's mind or body. And so wanting to claim some ownership of our bodies and our time. And And so that's really where like some of the thinking of like, hey, we should have like cooperative ownership and create pathways for other people who join us to be able to have the same opportunities for ownership of the business too, because like it's really just again a values thing. Like we want folks to know that we place a high value on themselves as a person, whatever skills they might be bringing to the table, and also have the sense that they can control some of the outcomes of their lives. I think a lot of times in the workplace, you're just sort of doing as you're told, like you have a boss and you're just sort of like a supervisor and you're just sort of doing things down the chain, and you really wanted to like, in meaningful ways, sort of like make it more horizontal. There's still like, I don't want to say chain of command, but in moments when like there's heavy things in the air, there's like, okay, this person is doing this and this person is doing that. So we have good sort of delineation of our roles and things like that. But really like wanting to create space for folks to feel like, hey, they can like, this is something that you can really own and take on and like bring whatever like value or essence that you have to the table, because we want our table to be like full and robust. And so that's where a lot of the beginnings of like, hey, being a co-op is a really, really important like value, like big V value. And then I think as we've rolled on, it's become, owning a business with someone is like getting married in so many ways. Honestly, running an organization like laterally, and the human piece is what is just as tricky, if not more tricky, than just the running a small business piece. Because I think that's something that gets a little lost in the sauce with cooperation and the cooperative economics. It's like something that we're all down with, obviously, and it sounds really great and is really great. But there's like these two pieces of like, hey, it has to be a successful business, or at least a business that like can make enough money to support whatever vision that everyone has. That part is really challenging, no matter which industry you're in. Construction is a very challenging industry to make consistent money and make it all make sense. But then, there's like the human piece of, again, like how do we make this truly work for all of us when we have all these different personalities and different traumas and different backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's been a really like, again, an iterative process, the co-op piece for us. Like you're looking at the co-op sort of as it stands right now, just Blaine and I. Again, we had at some point more owners. We've never had less owners. But it's been sort of this fluctuation, and a lot of it's on the human side. And I think for myself personally, I'm getting to a space where I still deeply believe in cooperatives and cooperation, but I think it can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to mean that everyone is an owner of the business. It can be like a collective of businesses who are deciding to work cooperatively. Like right now we've sort of brainstormed together and talked to a few of our trade partners that we really enjoy working with around like, hey, we could have a cooperative of tradespeople, all with different businesses, but who like give each other first right of refusal on jobs and who like stick up and support each other. Like if a client's just bulking on numbers, it's like, hey, you're gonna lose all of us, not just the electrician, but like we're walking away too. Like the numbers and the value that we put out is important, and we're working in cooperation with each other. There's like really powerful and important pieces still that we value and hold on to around like the opportunities for cooperatives. Like there's, as you know, like through this sort of, or might not know, but there's this like kind of deep solidarity economy movement that's happening. And within that, there's becoming a lot more access to capital and to resources for folks who like form cooperative businesses or form producers co-ops or what have you. And so like that is still something that I think is really powerful and like an important piece of the next step of like true self-determination for our communities is like how can we tap into resources that aren't extractive, that aren't going to like if something goes awry, because like small businesses fail all the time. As you all know, co-ops fail literally all the time. And after that co-op fails, it's like, it shouldn't be that this person then loses their house or their car, so it's like, there's this whole sort of new world of like finance around cooperatives that is still really powerful and potent, and that's not the only reason that we're still plugged in, it's for all the other values, but it is an important piece, I think, to talk about and think about when you're sort of considering cooperatives and cooperation. But it can be like deeply, deeply challenging. And that's something that I think that we need to continue to talk about in movement spaces. Keep the romance and the joy around what cooperation can be, but also like stay grounded in just the reality of running a business in America and also like working with other human beings. And so, yeah, it's not to like sound jaded or anything, like I'm still a believer all the way. We really like do this work for that reason. But yeah, it's also, I think, an important thing to talk more about as like more folks are entering into the cooperative space, especially in construction too, which is, there's a great opportunity in construction for people to like come in and make money. There's so much opportunity in the trades. We were reading this thing like for every 5 tradespeople, skilled tradespeople now that are leaving the trades because they're retiring, there's only 1 new person coming in, and that person is completely green, like no skills at all. And so there's like, and y'all probably experience all the hack contractors and builders out there. It's like there's a low barrier to entry, and there's not as many skilled people. So it's like it's a cool space for folks to come into, get trained up, and have the opportunity to like make like really good money, like a livable wage, which out here is insane. The cost of living is wild. But to make a livable wage and to like have dignified, meaningful work. So we're still very much engaged with the co-op spaces in that way too, of like trying to encourage other, Black and brown owned construction businesses to form and to be able to work together and just like enter into an industry that has a ton of opportunity right now, especially as the older heads are all aging out and there's this massive, massive gap in like skills and opportunities. So that was a lot. I don't know if folks have any questions or thoughts. I could ramble all day about co-ops.
I have a question about training opportunities. What does that look like with you all?
Yeah, so we are in the process of a 3-year transition, a pivot towards doing more or providing more education and like training opportunities. Because, Dom and I have been to countless workshops and spaces, and we might be the only colored folks there, period. And so we understand the other side. And in our particular area in the Mid-Atlantic, there is such high, and I think more broadly, I think there's a shift that's been happening in the movement spaces, especially like in food and ag in particular, where, I think there was cultural and ideological focus over the last 10, 20 plus years, and more recently in the last 10 some odd years has been a more concerted shift for folks looking for more hard, hands-on technical skills to accompany the ideological, political, and like cultural pieces. And we want to be able to have the opportunity to share that space and provide those opportunities. So we held, we've done workshops in place, like at job sites and stuff like that. And I think last year or 2 years ago, we did a timber frame workshop at our place. And we're in the midst of this transition where we're starting to build out the infrastructure, the social infrastructure, organizational infrastructure to provide more workshops, not just led by Dom and I, but also to open up the space to identify where are other folks of color or queer folks or femme folk who already have the skill set of various trade or craft, and can we provide a container in which they can help lead a workshop, let's say. And so we have more demand than we can keep up with in our area. And so it's a slow process because we're also a contracting company. So we don't rely on, up until recently, grant funds coming in. So what we do with our body is what we have for our families and ourselves. And so that poses a tension for us to figure out how to navigate it. So fortunately, we did receive grant funds to help us over the next few years make that transition to where we can get to a point to be a space to provide more like training opportunities for folks who are interested in starting their own business or getting into the trades, but more broadly just to proliferate this skill set that, quite honestly, most of our ancestors 2-3 generations ago had these skill sets, whether it's not, excluding timber frame because that's super specialized, but carpentry or even expanding the concept of the crafts. Like my partner, Samaria, she's an herbalist. And so thinking about what is the intersection of what we might call like holistic crafts, whether it's like herbalism all the way over to timber framing, and in between is maybe hands-on instrument making or natural farming techniques or plant identification, like to be holistic in the way we combine these things, because these are all skills required to, in our vision to thrive in what's coming, to thrive in the midst of climate chaos or a shifting society, to have the skill sets for us to ultimately become even more resilient. And this is why this project's super exciting, because this is infrastructure that is going to allow the community in Urban Tilth to, if there is a resiliency scale, I'm gonna be high up on that scale. And I know that's what's behind it. And and we want to be a part of providing a base for more resiliency to come up in our communities.
Nice.
You mentioned a living wage. When we posted this workshop, that was someone's comment. They said, "Well, how about a living wage?" And so, I wasn't sure like what that looked like in the construction or in co-ops or construction. But you said that is how do you all how do you approach that? Like, does it just depend on that area of the country that you're in, or like how do you make sure that there's a living wage?
Yeah, there's we'll look at like sort of the standard rates that folks will get paid with similar skills and in other companies, and then like we'll go above that. You're just starting out and you're just a laborer, like you might have to hustle to do some other things. Like it's not going to be $70 an hour without any skill. Not saying that we don't value people in that way, but it's like it goes back to the business side. It's like this challenging tension of like also running a successful business but not being like an exploitative boss, obviously, or like so our profit margins are very low because we pay our people very well, and that's where in construction that's where people make the money is off the labor. Like the plumber that comes and does your house, you spend $80 in material and might maybe charge his helper $20 an hour, and then the rest, we charge you $90 an hour for that person, and the rest is just pocketed. So it's like we go above and beyond, but there's a scale. Like it's also about like being like somebody who just starts isn't paid as much as Blaine and I. It's just like that's part of the business, and so it's a little bit of both. Like you gotta understand the industry that you're working in, because you don't want to set people up with unrealistic expectations also too. Like, because if it doesn't work with Earthbound and then they're going to use their skills elsewhere and they're like, oh, well, I'm getting paid $40 an hour less than I was with these guys. It's like it is a tension. Navigating contradictions is like the biggest thing of running a cooperative, or really just like being a good, decent person in America anyway. It feels like, and so there's a lot of that. I know that's not a great answer, but just like trying to be real, it's like
I actually want to go deeper on that, because this is one of the misnomers of cooperatives is that if you know anything about cooperatives, the first thing you think is that everybody makes the same amount of money, and that skill or experience doesn't matter. You make the same amount of money from the moment you step in the game. You're on the same table, and can you speak to that a little bit, like? You make it a more complex vision for everyone. Sometimes that is true, right? Yeah. And there's things that happen as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're laughing because, we just had to navigate a really tricky dynamic where that was kind of what was unfolding with a person we were working with who was on the verge of actually becoming an owner in the company. And we were just starting to establish the process for the transition, and it's very tricky. And the way we've landed on navigating it is that it's based for our industry. It's very much based on like skill, like the skills you bring to the table, like in our case, hard skills, and then executive functions. And so we have sort of a 3-tiered process by which, you know, you matriculate your way to ownership. And as you move through those scales, your executive responsibilities are to increase, because that ultimately is what influences the profitability of a business. It's how well you can run the business and work on within the business. There is a great calculator. I think it's called the Living Wage Calculator. And you can type in your zip code or your county or what have you, and it gives you a sort of a cardinal direction of like, oh, do they have 2 kids? You can start making all these like metric changes to look at it, in addition to what other companies do. But you know I made that mistake, thinking at first, yeah, wages are level inside of a co-op. And one, it's actually just not profitable even to do that. But 2, the reality is nobody does the same work. And so then the question becomes, how do you value the different forms of work and then transparently justify that to everybody involved? And so that's the conflict we ran into a couple of years back with this really great person we were working with, was that the conflict was that they did not want to serve any executive functions, but they wanted to earn the same wage as Dom and I. And we were just very clear, like, quite literally, it just doesn't work like that. You may have skills that are comparable to ours, even though ours are ahead. But if you're not providing an executive function to the entity, it's a hard sell to say, oh, cool, we can be at the same wage. When it's just like, when the job ends, they go home. Me and him are in meetings. We're still talking to a bookkeeper. We're filing taxes. We're figuring out the next job. So the work still continues. And so that's what I would say is like, don't think that hierarchy means that someone is better than you. Don't think that hierarchy is evil. Hierarchy is actually super important, but hierarchy can manifest itself in so many different ways in which how people share power. Like, I feel like the issue about hierarchy, or one of the many issues of hierarchy in capitalism, is where power mixes with force, and that's oppressed onto someone below you. Versus in a co-op, if you remove force, power is discussed and it's understood, and the roles are delineated. And that can be very hard, because in a cooperative process, we are helping ourselves and each other we're working with to think differently about the way in which we work together. And we're all trained to work as capitalists if we were educated in this country. Like, we're from elementary school onward, it's a slow training process. So then when you get into co-op, you know, to his point, the number one reason why most co-ops fail is these interpersonal dynamics, typically around power and typically around resources. And so that becomes the tricky part, how to navigate that. And, you know, if we could go back in time, I'm sure we wish we would have handled things differently. But, you know, we've learned along the way. But yeah, it's very nuanced, you know. It's like, and maybe in, like, you know, I have friends who are in food co-ops. Their approach is different, you know, because the industry dictates a different sort of relationship to labor. You know, in construction, it's like you have laborer, and the laborer does a lot of the physical work, but the person managing the project is getting paid the most. And if they weren't around, there'd be no work for the laborer. So there's all these like dynamics to unfold, you know, to unpack in your given industry. But, you know, at the onset, I would say, like, if someone is looking to be in a collective process or in a collective process, it's like, there's like a checklist I run through in my mind at this point. It's like, listen first, be patient second, communicate with compassion, be patient again, and be willing to be uncomfortable. And I just have this checklist I go through in certain moments, and it's helpful to navigate situations. You know, it's like, okay, are we all trying to get to the same point, but we all have different ways we get there. And so my personal checklist helps me get there as like one piece of it, from our side.
Yeah, having really, really clear pathways to getting different wages and moving up is like so important as co-ops are forming, or if they are in process, like making sure that they have that so that folks can know, like, hey, if you do want to make more, there are pathways to be able to do that. Like if money or if decision making at a different level is something that you really are seeking, like there's ways to get there. And that's what we do is like there is a path, like we do enable you and empower you to do that. But what we found, and I really hold really true nowadays, is like not everyone wants to really do that. Not everyone wants to be an owner. Like they might say that they do, but the reality of owning a business is like, yeah, it doesn't just end at 5, and it doesn't just start at 9. Like it's sort of all encompassing, and it can be a lot. And so to the point of the person that we were talking about, incredible person. Yeah, we had this sort of 2 years of working with us before you can kind of be eligible then for like being a worker owner actually. And yeah, at that sort of 2-year mark, we had a really candid conversation where it was like, look, like we hear you that like your wage is not where you want it to be in comparison to us. It's higher than, anyways.
Higher than everybody else.
So, yeah. But it's like, okay, cool. Like you need to then like do project management. You can't just be coming, swinging a hammer, and then going home. It's like you have to do project management. You have to help with expense tracking. You have to call and manage and talk to subs. And they outright were like, I don't want to do that. And so it becomes really challenging then, like how can we, again, justify the similar wages if you're not doing the same amount of work? And it's I know this doesn't always feel great, but it's like these are the hard conversations that have to be had in cooperative businesses. Otherwise, yeah, they will just fail. And a lot of it, back to the people part, is like resentment. The person who's doing a ton feels really resentful that their co-conspirator is doing significantly less. This is how it can be done is a really important thing. And then also like having candid conversations and identifying with folks like, hey, if that's not what you want to do, that's fine. We're not saying that there won't be cost of living, wage adjustments, and as your skills grow, you won't get paid, et cetera, but it's like, we just have to have that conversation because it's like the amount of work and human power that goes into the engine of this business. Like there has to be equity. It has to feel equitable, from both perspectives, and that can be a challenge. And yeah, I've come to the place now where it's like it's totally fine for people to just be owner or just be worker. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what some people want. Just like go home, and that is totally fine. And like working at a place that's dignified. We have this person, Shelby, who works with us. Shelby's awesome. Shelby definitely gets a bunch of say in like what goes on and input and stuff like that. But like at 5, Shelby's trying to just go home, and like that's all good. That's all, and it doesn't change her experience or like her value or like what we're cooperatively working on. It's still very powerful, but it's like, yeah, the wage thing is like a very, very tricky thing. And really important to have stuff in writing and have like deep communication and conversations continually with folks around their wage, around why their wage is, around why my wage is. Like I'm totally down with this person. We like spelled all the things out when shit started to really hit the fan, around like why there's this, perceived wage gap. And it's like, well, It's a tricky thing. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not going to go off, but
it's not for it's not for the faint of heart. If you want to go far fast, you go alone. But if you want to go further, you go together. Is the old adage. And is a co-op, if you're looking at like on business terms, is a co-op more efficient, quote unquote, than a typical business doing the same thing? Without a doubt, no. But that's not why that's not why you engage in a collective and cooperative. Efficiency is sort of irrelevant at that point. It's more around this value set and to tease something out, it's like we're very much about preserving the person and like the humanity and the relationship. And that's also the thing too. It's like at this point we're established, so it's like, you know, our families depend upon the things that we do, and so that adds a weight to us versus maybe 5 years ago when, you know, we were floating in the wind. You know, the context was different, you know, and so as the context changes, staying true to the values that it's at the end of it all, it's about the person, it's about the people, and how do we help us get to the next stage.
I feel like in the conversations that we had kind of early, when we were all kind of just entering into that co-op space, I think, together and, you know, meeting up in it and whatever, we didn't talk enough about like what the burden of ownership really means. We talked a lot about the power of ownership, you know, of like taking back our power and owning our own, you know, profits and not going to be profited off of. But we didn't talk enough about that, you know, you don't go home when everyone else goes home.
That's right.
That, you know, you can't pick and choose what you do and what you do not want to do. You have to do all these things in order to keep it all going, you know, and I feel like we didn't clearly define ownership in a way outside of splitting money. And I feel like that's where the work really needs to be happening. It's like, what is this responsibility that comes with really being the one who's driving, the ones who are driving a ship, you know? Like, what is that responsibility? Like, it comes in many forms, taxes, and, you know, speaking with subs, having hard conversations with people who don't want to talk to you, and like all the uncomfortable things. Like, it's a whole set of uncomfortable things. There's some good things too, you know? But that was my comment. But my question is, what keeps you in co-ops? What do you love about it? What makes working for a co-op different than working for that super efficient single owner business?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's, well, what keeps me going is like a lot of times is the camaraderie. There's something that happens when a person feels seen, and like seen on so many different levels, like, and I've definitely been in like worked for companies where it's like, you know, they're a regular company, there's one owner who's making money, but the space feels good, but you don't really it's not very all-encompassing, like holistic, like where you can just sort of be yourself. You're just performing your job, and when the job is done, that's that. And that's what keeps me going. It's like knowing that, you know, we live quite close to each other. Shelby lives close to us, and it's like, okay, well, after work, we're just gonna sit down and chit chat. We're gonna sit in some chairs and we're gonna talk because we enjoy each other and we work together. And then of course, like on the ownership side of like, not as names on a deed of owning a business, but owning your means of production, we have a say in our relationship to time. And that's a really big deal. Yes, there's the burden that you spoke to of like, you know, how many times you're like, you know, it's ready to have dinner with the kids, or it's time to eat, and like you get the food down, you're like, oh, I forgot I have this meeting I gotta get to. Like, oh, I gotta send this quote in or this email, I totally forgot. Yeah, that sucks. But it comes with it, because the trade-off on the other hand is like, you're setting the rules. And there's something to be said about that. And that's what keeps me, personally, keeps me coming.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All of those things, you know, and like, yeah, we believe like still deeply in like building Black power, you know, and like owning, the means for production is so important. And it's like I feel like we can help so many other folks who are thinking sort of similarly like navigate some of the pit. Like we hit every single roadblock, stumble, barbed wire that you can
Every
hit.
challenge imaginable.
Every single one. And so just to be able to help anyone who's looks like me try to start a construction business, you know, is like a big reason why I still do this work and still like love the space. And yeah, like having a strong, you know, economic base. Back to the money piece is just really important. You know, it's like it's just hard to move and do anything if like money is just so tight and everybody's just like in survival mode all the time. So I do think cooperatives, you know, even if it's a co-op of co-ops, but just like that power that can be generated together is something that's really important. And we see it, you know, ourselves, like our subs are black, you know, we're able to like really push the envelope in a lot of ways that we want to, versus a lot of other companies that we see that look like us but aren't doing what we're doing but are like really struggling. You know, it's the cooperation that we've cultivated internally and then like with the people that we work with is like really palatable. So yeah, there's just still something there, like something that I deeply believe in.
Do you find that being a cooperative business allows you to demand higher fees?
That's a good question. It depends, and quite honestly, it really just depends on like the quality of the work that precedes us, like of our work that precedes us. Because I think the vast majority of people we work with, or like our clients or what have you, they may or may not care that we're a co-op. But they come to us because of this is what it looks like when we're done. And that's, you know, going back to the ownership piece, it's like in this money thing, and I keep bringing up capitalism and relationship to resources. Don't be too lucid. Is that you know, I grew up what I call broke rich. We were broke, but I always felt like I was the richest person in the world because of family and like our spirituality and like culture and stuff like that. But I've had to come to terms with understanding how I came up has influenced how I then look at finances for a business. I'm looking at something from my relationship to resources from my daughter's age on to being a grown adult, you know, grown human, if you will. And so when we put numbers on paper and send that to another person, that's my perception. So I'm looking at something and I'm thinking it's high. They then get that. They think, oh, this is low, this is great. And so then there's been this renaissance, if you will, revelations of like realizing how do we really value our work from a monetary standpoint. You know, for years this low profit margin isn't just because we're trying to pay ourselves well and pay the people we work with well. Is quite honestly, we didn't perceive that we could be charging a higher amount, and that we've always been under all the other competition in our area. You know, and that's a tough pill to swallow because, you know, depending upon who you're working with. You know, in our early years we're working with farmers, so it's like we know the farm space, so we're not trying to be greedy or elicit more economic pain on a farmer than they're already experiencing. But as we've pivoted beyond just working with farmers to homeowners, to other nonprofits or larger clients, if you will, organizations, we've had to change our perception of what's financially appropriate for. So it fluctuates. We have a baseline we can go to, but then we can gauge like, hey, okay, maybe this one client we worked with a couple years ago, they can take a higher dollar amount, and that affords us some latitude when we encounter a community group that wants something but they couldn't afford it if you're outright contracting or something like that. And that's the hardest part to me personally of ownership, is like you're at the edge of the loading screen when you're like running as an owner, right? It's like, you know, if anyone's played video games, old school video games, you got to the edge of your video game and then it pauses till it loads. That's what it's like being an owner. But sometimes you can't pause. You feel like you can't pause, so you just keep going. But you got to realize you can always pause.
Right.
And that's been the thing I feel like we've landed at recently. Is like, oh, you can pause, and it's okay to pause. And so, yeah.
Yeah, really quick, Blaine brought up something too that's, I think, not talked about enough, but is an important piece of it, is like a lot of community groups and community spaces that are forming co-ops, they really want to then serve the community that they come from, right? Rightfully so. But there's like the reality of like oftentimes the community can't afford, you know, like we are at the place now where like we're building custom homes, and it's like we've sort of priced ourselves out of like some of the folks that like we like the starts that we had with like the small scale farmers and things. So again, it's about really like having those conversations about navigating that contradiction also, and coming up with like, yeah, we have solidarity builds and spaces where like, hey, because we charged this wealthy couple top dollar for this thing, we're now able to do a smaller project with the community and charge almost nothing, like waive our labor even sometimes, like. So, but we're only able to do that because of this, the profit that we made off this other job with these folks that are not value aligned at all. You know, and so it's like, I was at the Just Transition Finance training with Climate Justice Alliance last year, met this amazing person, you'll relate to this story, met this amazing person who wanted to do an herbal medicine cooperative, which is like beautiful and awesome, but they, as we were going through the business model canvas process, they were like, yeah, we don't want to sell to wealthy white people. You know, but when we're pricing things out during the pro forma, it's like, look, for y'all to just even begin to turn a profit, you're talking about tinctures that are like $16. It's like the community is oftentimes not going to buy that. So it's like you have to come up with some sort of scheme, if you will, to be able to like sell to the folks who can pay for your rate, like the true, you know, embedded, embodied cost of your labor and all the things, your overhead, all of that, and then be able to subsidize so that the community can also get this amazing medicine. It's like, it's a real tension that I sense in the co-op world now. Like, folks want these businesses, but they want their businesses to only work then for the community, and that's tough, you know. And I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but it's just like something I think to think about that's not talked about as much.
I wanted to ask about, so in a co-op, and you mentioned your daughter, so do you form things for the family through your profits? Because you can't really like put a co-op in a trust, right? Like, how does that work?
I don't know. Trusts are so confusing.
Yeah, trust. Yeah, trust is a totally different. The trust isn't really related to a cooperative business. Not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but trust can look so many different ways. You can have a trust over property, over land, or a housing trust. You can have trust over financial resources, stocks, endowment, things like that. You can have trust over easements. There's all these different. You can have trust over businesses as well, but trusts are just totally different from a co-op. But to speak to your point that I think I'm hearing you on. Is that the way that we've structured our Earthbound is that folks who work within Earthbound, us including owners, there's like a ripple effect of which people can benefit from Earthbound as a space. So it's like, for example, like anyone who works in Earthbound has access to the tools of the company. The company owns lots of expensive tools, and those tools people can, in the past, have used those as like opportunities to do side jobs on the weekends or if we have a down period between work. But in terms of like how my personal family, like how we're able, you know, it's like it's the income I earn that supports the family, and that's calculated. Like we, not every year, but actually every 2 years, we'll calculate literally like what is that household needs, like Dom's household or my household, and the other person was working with us. We were calculating their household needs and how they show up with their partner, so that we can understand how best Earthbound can provide the financial resources so people are able to meet the means that they need to, within their own household dynamic. And then more broadly for the community, we're part of Black Dirt Farm Collective and several other farmer groups in our area. And so rather frequently, all those groups are benefiting from all the infrastructure that we've been able to acquire, or equipment we've been able to acquire, whether our truck, our trailer, or haul straw. They can use our tools or equipment that we own. And so, in that sense, the business is seated within the community. So even though he and I are the sole owners at this moment, we're not the only individuals that benefit from all the things that flow through Earthbound. Like Earthbound was leveraged to purchase property for a whole collective of other people. And we just, because we have the finances to pull it off, we could pull down the loan to secure it for this community group that there'd be no place that would give them that money, basically. To try to speak to that a bit.
Wow, this is extremely fresh. This is blowing my mind. Has your being a co-op and your value that you offer and your values influenced your relationship with suppliers in terms of pricing? Like, do you see better pricing in the field because of your values and your value?
No, it's money is funny. The more money you spend with somebody, the better they're going to treat you. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of how we have like Brandywine Rentals. There's a rental company that's like right down, and we refer everyone to us. So we get hooked up really well with them. But in terms of material suppliers, no. Since COVID, they don't. The amount of money that some of these suppliers are making, once inflation hit during COVID, they're never going back. It's diabolical, the amount of money some of these people are making, the companies are making. But no, yeah. But again, to the point that he references, that we're, organizing with all these other businesses of color, or like for plastering, we have a lot of queer folks and femme folk we work with. And so we're all working together to make sure that when we have jobs come through, like we're all getting in on it. Mm-hmm. So everyone is getting fed, and so it's like, those aren't our suppliers, they're like our partners in that sense.
How did those relationships come about?
Workshops, meeting people at workshops, there's a lot of it. And so just like word of mouth.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Folks see what we're doing and from all over the country, I'd love to come rock with y'all. Cool. We got work. So a lot of it was this summer we hosted a half dozen of queer plasterers from literally all over the country. We came to do the clay plaster on this natural home that we built. And it was cool. It was all just kind of relational based. Somebody knew somebody and they came out, and luckily we were able to, at the moment we're at in the plastering, it was pretty beginner level, so it was everyone kind of got to fit in and learn. And we put people up too, again, we're a wealthy client, we're charging top dollar, so it was cool, y'all want to come out here and put your physical labor on the line, we'll pay for you to be out here and work. There's something that most 99% of other employers are not going to do. You want to work, cool, but you got to figure out all your move and all your stuff and wherever you stay, we don't care. But for us, it was we want to make sure that it's sweet. Come out here, you're grinding, we want to make sure that it's truly worthwhile. So, those things, we always try to keep it really sweet. But again, it's some of our clients aren't sweet. So,
Can you say a little bit about startup costs? I know it's super complicated, and usually the way people start is never recommended. But because if somebody's hearing this and they're not anywhere near where you are, how do you coach them on a pathway to getting started? And how much resource do they need to really kind of establish and build something that's going to be able to keep them sustained?
Well, we've had two different startup phases within Earthbound. There was the startup phase pre-Dom, and then the startup phase post-Dom. I can speak to pre-Dom. Remember I said he's a co-op guru. Yeah, so when Earthbound first started, it was like I would suspect many other startups. It's bootstrap. The straps of the bootstraps. So how I started it was basically I had a contract. You know, I was writing at the time and doing community organizing, and so that's what paid me between my farm seasons. And so I would roll that money over and infuse that into the first few projects that we got. Some people that might have more privilege or financial know-how might take out a loan, or they already have pre-existing capital that they're working with and find a grant. I didn't know any of what I know now at that time, so I only knew how to use my body to make things go. And so that's how I approached it. I was able to save up some money from my own personal work, and then as we got jobs in construction, it's very like, to fix this door, you could use 10 tools to fix the door. You could use 2, but if you use the 10, it's a lot faster, and therefore you can make more money. And so in the first couple of years, because we're so equipment heavy, the vast majority of the money went towards equipment. It's buying the right tool for the job, a tool that can do multiple jobs. Never buy a tool that does one job. Buy a tool that does multiple things. It's a big deal. It was a hard pill to learn at first. And then you're just losing a lot of sleep. And I'm saying this, I'm giving you the honest of like how I did it. I do not recommend going about it this way. The second startup phase is the way I would recommend. But this one was helpful to just, I think to share of like, you can go about it hard, which is the way I went at it. You can use your personal resources, which then creates this stress, but then that stress propels you to try to like push at it a little bit harder, you work at it more. Versus the second startup phase is Dom was coming on and we were doing the full transition to ownership. It was much more methodical, and where you start to ask the questions and think through the things that are relevant to your company, and that when you start to get your jobs, in our case in construction, when you write the budget for the job, you're budgeting in these early jobs allotments for, which I found really helpful, allotment for tools that are not personal money anymore, that's built into the job. You're billing in money for administrative time after the job, if it's a smaller job, until you start to accrue more money, and then you start to build in an early profit margin. Like I would definitely say, and I'll pass it over to Don, is like for anyone doing any startup, at the onset, do not expect for yourself to get paid. That could take a considerable amount of time. For some metrics, they say it could take 3 to 5 years before an owner could see any money, personal money. But stay frugal and be methodical about setting up the entity of your business, and be really smart about how you're spending your money.
No, that's right. And I think in the co-op space, it's a double-edged sword. I won't talk about the bad edge as much, but there's a lot of opportunity through non-extractive finances like the seed commons and all the loan funds that come out to like help support some of those startup costs. But also, there's a real method to the madness of like truly understanding like what those costs are, and like understanding your industry, and like making sure the wage that you're asking for is like reasonable and realistic, and that is dependent on what industry you're in for sure, and the work that you're doing. But I think that is something for co-ops specifically is a resource that wasn't around even as much as when we first started. I mean, we have some non-extractive loans we've gotten through the seed commons, which have been game changers, including the land that we purchased. But in the beginnings, it was rough. And so I think now some of these newer cooperatives or folks who are transitioning to cooperatives have a really cool opportunity to, like, if they can really understand and spell out some of those startup costs and like working capital in the beginning, to like have spaces where they can actually like receive some of those infusions of cash and capital to like make things work. Because it is hard, you know, and like, yeah, the point of Blaine, like being able to do that is like also the context is like us at 25, no kids, you know, like it's different as time, like I couldn't, the Earthbound that I came into, I could never come into a business like that right now with a kid, and like, you know, it'd be impossible, you know, so it's like, even how we started up isn't even realistic for us now, you know, so it's like, that's just a thing. So I really do think looking at some of these non-extractive lending outlets as a way to like, at least support some of that initial startup is gonna be really important for folks. And that's what everyone is doing, like these wealthy kids, like their non-extractive loan is their dad, you know, like no one is just, yeah, it's like it happens everywhere all the time where people are getting injections of cash to be able to like do their thing and maybe fail, you know, but like no one cares if the rich white lady's yoga studio fails that her husband's been supporting, because it's like it doesn't matter, you know, it's like, but nobody's talking about like, yeah, that was an injection of startup cash that she got to even be able to get the building and start the thing. So it's like the scarcity mindset, I think, in our communities where we're like, we think we need to do everything like really thin, but it's like that's just not how cats are doing it out here. Like people are blowing money to get things going because like they come from wealth and privilege. And all these like rich entrepreneurs I can think of that are like, oh, they say they're self-made, and it's like no, hardly. $1 million loan from your dad, Trump, like come on, like it's like there's so many tales of that. So I don't think we should be shy also about like looking for cash and looking for capital to try to get things going. We need to make sure the businesses work. That's the other side of the sword, because often the businesses are dog shit. Sorry, excuse my language, but it's like they have no real plan except for like the kumbaya, we like each other part. So it's like that piece is something that I think we need to focus a lot more on in movement spaces, and just like operating successful small businesses. And like even sometimes like cutting out some of the fluff, like it's great, but it's like it can't always be the feel. Sometimes we need to talk about the numbers. But yeah, I also think folks should be shy about looking for capital through non-extractive lending.
And we're in this space, Brianna, and so this is a space actually where that can happen, right? You all, Brianna?
Yes.
So this is a space like if you're looking for, yeah, I think she can speak to that. So non-extractive capital.
Yeah, when we talk about the resources that we have here. Yeah, so at Corporation Richmond, we of course help folks get their business ideas together, making sure that, like Doug was saying, not having dog as businesses, putting our ideas together, making sure our financial statements are together, that feasibility and all that stuff. But when people are ready to take that next step, we have access to Seed Commons, which is non-extractive loan fund. So folks don't have to put up their right arm and their kidney to get some funding in. You know, they have like back pen or things like that. They don't have to put anything up for collateral really. Really like the due diligence of the pre-work that you did to get to this point is kind of like your collateral. You know, like really that you put that effort and that work in to get to where you are now that you're ready to take that next step. That's the collateral that comes from that Seed Commons requires for the money. And then we also have like a great opportunity here where we kind of do our own loan fund and not necessarily have to use Seed Commons proprietary funds, especially for supporting things that are like homegrown right here in Richmond, really giving folks the best terms that we can. But of course with Seed Commons, it's a loan fund, just like any loans, there's interest. That's just the name of the game. Have to be able to sustain themselves, and that's why they're able to do some of that is through interest. So with our fund, we're able to have it a little bit lower, practically zero, so that folks can get ahead and get faster.
So do you help with the business plan, or are you saying that you need to have a business plan and
So we have 3 pathways. So pathway 1 is just like idea development. So you can come with your idea, and we will help you pick a specific aspect that you want to develop. So maybe it's financials, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's overall feasibility, maybe it's finding a third person or something like that. That's what like pathway 1 is for. And then pathway 2 is full incubation for Richmond residents. And so a lot of people who have a business plan. I've kind of started working on like thinking about numbers, performance, things like that. They are further than just an idea. They're like, okay, we've gone through all these things. Maybe I put a little bit of my money in, or I need this so I can get to that next step and try something. That's when, the eligibility is that you need to have a business plan that you've been thinking through thoughtfully. And having grace, like just funding. So folks who already have an established business, they've been operating, they have P&Ls, like they are not new to this. They can kind of skip a lot of that foundational stuff that we're doing in Pathway 1 and 2, kind of go right to on there.
Operation Richmond can be your rich uncle. Gives you the loans for people who don't have the rich uncle, don't have Donald Trump's father. We have Operation Richmond.
Yeah, I would say the resource thing, it's like, I traveled to Cuba. You know, Cuba, and I think it's Spain, have the highest concentration of cooperatives in the world. And I remember I went there and I was like, I've been obsessed with co-ops for so long. And so I got there and I was just so like, oh my God, it's a co-op and it's amazing and da-da-da. And you know, and I'm in this one farm and I'm learning more about it. And everyone has, you know, the thing I really realized at the time is like everyone had their role. They had their role and it was clear. And that's what made the workspace so fluid. Is because I feel like where co-ops can run into issue from what I've seen is there isn't enough clarity around the roles. And then lines start to get blurred. And those lines are often blurred in people's minds and it's not communicated. And then the tensions can arise, more frustrations can arise. And having those roles and delineation is so important. And then also as like historically marginalized folks or folks coming from low economic backgrounds, that is going to shape the way you think about your co-op and your business. And from the onset, you have to challenge the way you think. That will be the number one hinderer to your project getting off the ground. Like in Dom's example of these folks that want to do this medicinal herb co-op. Was that a FWA?
So I think it's out this way. No, FWA.
It was FWA. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I used to work down there.
Yes,
So
you're right.
And the reality is that some of these things are best not to become businesses and leave them as community endeavors or projects or processes, or seek out the nonprofit route or a grant to be fiscally sponsored. Not everything needs to become a business. And that's just something, you know, people have to be very honest with. It's like, what's the goal? You know, like for us, you know, we have all these values, but also our analysis was ultimately that without economic security, there's no way that we can get to the level that we wanted to get to. And that was just in our perspective. Someone else is going to have a different perspective. And so that's why business was the only option for but for others, you don't want to force it because the rules of the game can break you. That's the reason why so many businesses fail, because it's like these rules of the game are serious. And unfortunately, the way that society was constructed, those rules aren't built for us. And that's just the honest truth. And so that's where he keeps mentioning the contradictions come in when you start to play these rules that weren't built for those of us sitting in this room. You know, they're built for a very select few. That's where it can start to rub shoulders. And so you really have to be honest with yourself. Are you prepared to play that game? You know, and we all, you know, I really look up to, I call her Mama Doria, because I look up to her because I'm just like, good God, it's it's just amazing. I'm always amazed by many people, but definitely like settings like these where, you know, I know you're not the only one. Obviously, there's a team, but it usually takes a person or a few persons to initially put the first risk out, and that's something that should be, you know, cherished and honored. And so I'm super grateful that we're out here and that this came true. I remember we talked about the idea of this like many eons ago. So yeah, I just wanted to share that appreciation.
Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing this. Hopefully it goes long and far with Bob Richmond and everything, video recording. Any other questions before closing?
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time.